On my brother's 18th birthday, he got a luxury car, and me, just bills to pay. When I asked about this difference, my parents coldly replied, "It's completely fair because of..." My name is Olivia. I'm 20 years old, and I always knew there was a difference between me and my brother Jake, but I never imagined it would be this obvious. That day, the house was packed. My parents had thrown him a huge party, balloons everywhere, a lavish dinner table, well-dressed guests. It looked like something out of a movie. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing a greasy snack tray, when I heard my mother calling for everyone's attention. "Now, the moment we've all been waiting for," she announced, beaming as she held up a golden envelope. Jake, the golden boy of the family, grinned confidently as he took the envelope and pulled out a key. The room erupted in cheers. "A car! Oh my God, it's a Mustang!" one of his friends shouted. I walked over to the window, and there it was, a brand new, shiny red Mustang gleaming under the garden lights. My heart sank. I had turned 18 too. 2 years earlier on my birthday, there was no party, no presents. Just a small last-minute store-bought cake and a dry remark from my father. "Now that you're an adult, it's time to start handling things on your own." And that's exactly what I did. From that moment on, I paid my own bills, college, rent, food, working from morning till night while my brother lived like a prince. I took a deep breath, trying to swallow the bitterness, but something inside me burned. The weight of the injustice was suffocating. As the guests started to leave, I waited for the right moment and approached my parents. "Can I ask you something?" My voice was calm but firm. My mother crossed her arms. My father adjusted his tie. "Why did Jake get a car, and when I turned 18, all I got were bills to pay?" The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then came their cold response, a sentence I would never forget. "It's completely fair because of..." My heart pounded. My eyes darted between my parents' faces, searching for a reasonable explanation, something that made sense. But what came next was a punch to the gut. My father cleared his throat, adjusted his shirt cuffs, and said, without hesitation, "It's completely fair because Jake is our son. Well, you should be grateful for everything we've already done for you." My breath caught. "What do you mean? I'm your daughter, too." My voice came out louder than I intended, and my mother immediately glanced around, worried about who might be listening. "Olivia, lower your voice. Don't make a scene." A scene? I was imploding inside. "So that's it? He gets a car, a party, and I'm treated like a stranger?" My mother sighed, impatient. "Things are different for you, Olivia. They always have been." I had always suspected it, but hearing it out loud felt like a knife to the chest. "I'm adopted, aren't I?" My voice trembled. My father rolled his eyes as if he was tired of pretending. "Technically, yes, but we raised you, gave you a home, food, education. You should be grateful." Grateful? For being treated like a burden while Jake was showered with affection? My head spun. I had known something was off since I was little. Childhood photos showed only Jake, while I appeared in a few corners of the pictures, almost as an afterthought. At Christmas, his gifts were always bigger and better. If I needed something, like a new notebook for school, my father would grumble about unnecessary expenses. And now, finally, I understood everything. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry in front of them. "I never asked you for anything, never demanded luxury. I just wanted to be treated like family." My mother sighed. "Well, you can keep living here as long as you can pay your own bills. But if you're unhappy, maybe it's time to move on with your life." I swallowed hard. That was a warning. If I wanted to complain, the door was open. I looked over at Jake, who was leaning against his brand new car, smirking. At that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't be staying there much longer. I stormed into my room and slammed the door shut. My chest rose and fell rapidly. My mind was a mess. I needed to calm down. But how? Everything I had believed about my family had crumbled in seconds. I had always known I was treated differently, but hearing that I wasn't really their daughter, that shattered me. And the worst part? They didn't even try to soften it. To them, I was supposed to be grateful for the bare minimum, while Jake was the untouchable prince of the house. I sat on my bed and looked around my room. Small, undecorated. Nothing that truly made me feel like I belonged in this house. It felt more like a guest room than a daughter's space. Unlike Jake's, which looked like a 5-star hotel suite. My mind started drifting back in time. Now, every memory made more sense. I remembered when I was 8 years old, my first ballet recital. I had practiced so hard, so much. On the day of the performance, I sat anxiously, scanning the audience, searching for them. But the seats where my family was supposed to be remained empty. After the recital, I took a bus home by myself, still wearing my leotard and pink ballet slippers. When I arrived, my mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables as if nothing had happened. "Mom, you didn't come." My voice was weak. She didn't even look up. "Oh, sweetheart, we had dinner with Jake's friend's parents. You understand, right?" I nodded. I always understood. When I was 12, while other kids played after school, I stayed home taking care of Jake. My mother put me in charge of feeding him, helping him with his homework, even putting him to bed. "He's younger, Olivia. You have to help. That's what sisters do." But when I needed help with my own schoolwork, when I got sick and needed care, there was never any reciprocity. And now, at 20, nothing had changed. I blinked a few times, snapping back to the present. Everything was clear now. I had never been a daughter, never a priority. I was a burden, a favor they did for themselves to appear like a generous family in the eyes of others. I looked down at my trembling hands. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to get out of here. And somehow, I was going to make it happen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the silent house, feeling every beat of my heart like a cruel reminder of the life I had here. But something inside me had changed. The pain was still there, but now something stronger was growing. Defiance. It wasn't fair. It never had been. And if it were up to me, this would be the last night I cried over it. I got out of bed and grabbed my laptop. I opened my bank account. Just a small amount of savings, enough to cover 1 month's rent somewhere cheap. The problem was, what then? I worked part-time at a coffee shop and took college classes at night. My paycheck barely covered my expenses. If I left, I would need something bigger, something that could actually support me. I kept searching, desperate for a solution. And then I found something that made my heart race. Internship program, Tech Vision company, full scholarship plus living stipend for technology students. My mind started racing. I had always been good with computers. As a kid, I spent hours taking apart and reassembling old electronics, while Jake got expensive toys he barely touched twice. Maybe this was my chance. The next morning, I gathered my courage and asked to speak with my boss at the coffee shop. I explained my situation, told him I needed more hours. He sighed. "Olivia, you're a great employee, but we can't increase your hours right now." My stomach dropped. "But," he continued, "I know someone who might be able to help you." That's how he connected me with a friend who needed an administrative assistant. The pay? Twice what I was making at the coffee shop. I left shaking but hopeful. I went straight home and locked myself in my room. Within an hour, I submitted my application for the internship, and the next day, I got a response. I was invited for an interview. 2 weeks later, I received the news. I got the internship. And with that, I finally had the means to leave this house. That night, I sat down with my parents in the living room and spoke firmly. "I'm leaving." My mother's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Where are you going?" "Somewhere I'll be treated like a human being." My father let out a sarcastic laugh. "And how do you plan to support yourself? You'll come crawling back in no time. I met his gaze, unwavering. I'd rather fail trying to be free than spend my life being humiliated here. My mother crossed her arms, indifferent. Do whatever you want, just don't ask us for help later. I smiled because I knew I never would. That night, I packed my things and walked out the door without looking back. The cold night air hit my face as I walked out of the house with my suitcase. It felt strange, fear and relief mixed inside me, but one thing was certain. I was free. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval. I moved into a small rented apartment. Simple, with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a makeshift table. But it was mine. The days that followed were exhausting. I worked during the day at my new administrative job and did my internship at Tech Vision at night. I barely slept, ate poorly, but for the first time I was building something for myself. Months passed, and to my surprise, my dedication caught attention. One day, my internship supervisor called me in for a meeting. Olivia, you're one of the best we have here. We'd like to offer you a permanent position at the company. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. The salary was much higher than I had expected. I didn't even need to think. I accept. With that money, I was finally able to improve my life. I enrolled in extra courses, bought furniture for my apartment, and finally left behind any trace of the girl who once begged for her parents' love. But fate still had one more surprise for me. A year later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was leaving a coffee shop when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Olivia? I turned around and froze. It was Jake. But he looked different. Messy hair, worn out, clothes, dark circles under his eyes. Nothing like the spoiled, confident boy I remembered. Jake? I asked, surprised. He forced an awkward smile. What a coincidence. It's been a while, huh? There was something in his expression, a quiet shame. How are you? I asked, still trying to process the situation. He sighed and looked away. Things have changed. After you left, our parents started having financial problems. My car? Sold. Dad made bad investments and lost money. And me? Well, I was cut off from everything. I tried to process that. My parents had always acted as if they were untouchable, as if nothing could bring them down. And now they were struggling. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and in a way, I meant it. So, how are you? He asked, looking me in the eyes for the first time. I took a deep breath and glanced at myself. I was well-dressed, carrying a bag I had bought with my own money, holding a new phone, standing with confidence. I didn't have to say anything. He understood. Jake smiled, but it was a sad smile. You won, didn't you? I didn't respond. I just smiled back. At that moment, I realized that my greatest revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was freeing myself and building my own story, and that was the greatest justice I could ever have.